So today we're going to be talking about collaborating with brands and how to make magic with those brands in VR. So I've been in the industry for a very long time. So when you get to over 20 years, I don't think you mentioned the actual years, but I've worked a lot within AR and VR, probably the last 12 years. I worked as a brand, so I worked at Lego as a brand commissioning. I've been worked in collaboration with brands. I worked with Pottermore recently, and I've been at Sony has partly been part of being a brand. I've also created franchises as well. So with iToy, if anyone remembers iToy, back on PS2 days, we placed the player in the game and augmented around them. And then on PS3, we decided we wanted to move to augmenting a pet into the virtual world. And then we wanted to take that out into the streets, and we did that with PSP using markers. And then later on, I created one book of spells using an augmented reality book where we brought virtual reality to life, augmented reality to life in the living room. And then more recently, I worked on PlayStation VR Worlds, which is the project that we were where we demonstrated sort of the capabilities of PlayStation VR and introduced and showcased to the world sort of the different mechanics and the different controllers that you could use within VR. But recently, I joined Conspexit Games and set it up, but I also work as a freelancer, and I've been working with a group of people called Kuju Games. They've been around for over 20 years. They've created about 125 games. They've themselves been working within brands, mainly gaming brands, but Pokemon. They've worked with Nintendo, they've worked with Sony. But they've set up a new division called Kuju Enterprises, who we recently did a project through, and that's really to take the opportunity that exists now with VR and AR and brands wanting to get involved in interactivity. And I guess the question is, why do brands come to the gaming industry? And it's because really as developers, we have the power, we know the power of interactivity. Traditionally, games, brands work with quite passive media, so they work with print, web advertising, and video. And they sometimes interact via sort of web and social media, where they can get a little bit more engagement with their audiences. But when you start looking at VR and mixed reality and AR, that allows brands and companies to really engage with their audiences in a much deeper way and over a longer period of time. So we're like the masters of immersive interactivity, and that's why game developers, they have lots of skills in being able to bring brands into virtual reality. We spent years bringing audiences and entertaining them in the interactive media and taking experiences from very short blast plays on mobile to long MMO plays over years. So we have a lot of experience in that. And as a development team, we started to look at the pillars around enterprise, and I go over these in a case study. But the first one being emotional engagement, and then interactive media flow, and then brand and commercial focus. So to the first pillar, by emotional engagement, a lot of the experiences that we created, certainly around PSVR, involved introducing people that were new to VR, they've never been in VR. And one of the things to really to consider is having a primed space where you can introduce people to VR before you take them into your experiences. We create hubs or loading screens, but we make these inviting spaces for players to be. And it gets them over that kind of, wow, I'm in VR factor. It then allows you to move them into an immersive factor where you, as developers, create great assets, bring audio and visual and interactivity together. And then we create a moment of wow where we enthrall the audience by either changing scale or introducing emotions, and we keep on that little loop. And then we add an interactive media flow, and I say media because traditionally in games a lot of media tends to be 3D objects, and that's not always the case when you're working with brands. Often you're using different types of media. And it's our job to entertain, and we use narrative through brands. We may use music or 3D assets. And there are lots of things that we do to retain people within our 3D worlds or our imaginative worlds. So we often use reward or immersion or exploration, and we allow people to explore those worlds. But brand and commercial focus is, as a creative director, I tend to focus on the experience, and really, that's really keen. But when I'm working with a brand, I really need to get engaged with that brand. I really need to understand that culture. It needs to be authentic, and you need to be really sympathetic to that brand. So when we worked with J.K. Rowling, and we were fortunate enough to get the opportunity to meet with her, the big thing we had to learn was the canon. We had to understand the canon and the rules of that world so that we didn't suggest strange mechanics that didn't fit into that world. And we had to gain her confidence and her team's confidence that we actually were part of that brand. So becoming part of the brand that you're working for and letting that lead and give you the answers to some of your questions when you're developing is really important. And together they kind of really bring everything together and make a very solid enterprise product. So recently, the case study I'll go through is the Chainsmokers VR. It's a project that we've just completing. I don't know if anyone knows the Chainsmokers. No? Yes! I didn't. I had to ask my 13-year-old daughter, so I had to do a lot of brand absorbing. So the brief for the Chainsmokers was to create an interactive music experience for one of Sony's biggest acts at the moment, and they are a big band. Generally are. But our client was Ralph Creative and Sony Music. And together they've been building a campaign for this year called Lost in Music, where Sony want to bring their technology and their bands together at various events around the country. So naturally we looked at the PlayStation VR as a platform to deliver a new experience. We didn't have long, we had 4 months. I've been in Sony for 10 years. I've never done anything in 4 months at Sony, so it was a very compressed period of time. And our target audience were really just Chainsmokers fans, and we knew they were going to be non-gamers, so we knew that we'd have to make the experience fairly accessible. And we knew that we were going to demo at Southwest, which is a music festival, and we knew that we were not going to have completed development, so it was quite a challenge. So the high concept we developed was that we wanted to go into the mind of one of the Chainsmokers, which is Drew, and enter a dream state and travel through a neural network. The song that we were developing, Paris, though it has a location, isn't about the journey to Paris. It's more about the journey to through thoughts and minds. So that's where that came from. Though initially we thought it was going to be Paris, Texas, but it was Paris, France. We wanted to create something that was really dynamic and immersive. We knew it was going to be fairly short, but we also wanted to do something that was unique. We wanted players to be able to participate in the experience. We wanted them to interact with a band or interact with their music. And we wanted them to be able to remix the music as they went through it. So as you go through the experience, you can choose different paths to go down, which gives you slight remixed versions. You can interact with the world, and that will also add music and sound to that world. So I've got a video and a really big disclaimer. I'm a creative director, and I don't do video editing very well, but it's a load of B-roll, and the sound guys will kill me for this edit. But it'll give you an insight into the experience itself.
Craziest day, longest day ever. Finished the album, and this guy over here is asleep. Now look at him. What's he dreaming about? What's going on in that beautiful head of his? What is he thinking about?
We were staying in Paris to get away from your parents, and I thought, wow, if I could take this in a shot right now, I don't think that we could work this out. I don't tell it. I don't know if it's fair, but I thought, how could I let you fall by yourself? Well, I'm wasted with someone else. If we go down, then we go down together. They'll say you could to get away from your parents. I'm so proud of saying that with the cigarette, posting pictures of yourself on the internet, out on the television.
told you I was bad at editing, but anyway. So we'll go back over those pillars through this case study, so emotional engagement, interactive media flow, and brand and commercial focus. So I guess firstly, we wanted to prime users going into the experience. We knew it was going to be shown at shows and events, but I think it's useful anyway within VR for anyone who's new. We created a hub space where people could acclimatise after the excitement of queuing up for the event and putting a headset on for the first time. It gave them a space to sort of like look around and get over their VR sort of newbiness, and then we allowed them to immerse themselves into the experience. We looked at really simple controls because we knew we weren't going to be able to really teach them how to use a controller or complex mechanics. We also knew that a lot of the people that were playing wouldn't have necessarily be traditional gamers. Music's amazingly immersive, so that gave us the main thread of kind of being able to build an immersive experience, but we also wanted it to be relatable, so we did keep real-world elements in there to begin with before we got more abstract. And we had, obviously, moments of wow, gliding over the ocean, flying in the sky. So, as I said, we kept very simple mechanics, so we didn't have to teach them very much. We retained them through being able to explore that environment. So when it goes out on PNSN store, people will be able to explore different scenes. They'll be able to travel down different paths and get different remixes. I'm going to skip through these quite quickly. And we were authentic. The Chainsmokers is a brand that's based on sort of YouTube. They built themselves through Twitter, so we threw up a Twitter campaign to get fans engaged. So we asked them to send in selfies so that we could put those selfies into the experience and engage with the fans. But we wanted to get the guys involved, but of course we couldn't create 3D figures in that amount of time of high enough quality. So we got them to film an intro and an outro and provide some footage of them performing that people could interact with on billboards. And it kind of gave the tone for the band. It was very much part of them. Just a final couple of slides. Stakeholders, there were lots of them, lots of stakeholders. We mainly dealt with Ralph, who became our product champions, really. They were the guys that came and found us. Sony Music were the real client. They also had to provide us tracks. We had Sony, the headquarters as well. They were involved with the whole campaign. We had the artists, the managers, the label. Then we had PlayStation. We had VR consultancy. We had to pass to get onto the events and shows. We had Format QA, as you traditionally have, and now we're just going through PlayStation Network Store. And there were more. So I guess my tips were dealing with them. There have been many stakeholders, but there's a massive job to be done in managing expectations. These aren't traditionally game development people. They're not used to seeing our builds in the conditions that they appear. They really seem to be achieving things. And you need to find a champion, someone who's going to help you through that course. And I suppose ultimately respect the brand and become part of that brand itself. So that's me. I work for Conspexit Game Studio as well, and we're hiring developers. So if you know any, we're around.
Don't go anywhere. I think we've got time for zero questions. And I find it hard to believe there's only one person that heard of Chainsmokers. That's rubbish.